If you're watching this, you've stumbled into a tale the galaxy itself tried to bury. Before we begin, hit that like button to show you're with us. Drop a comment on what you'd do if you met the universe's deadliest predator face to face, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the rest of this story. Now, let's step into the dark where armies once marched, and where one human dares to stand alone. The galaxy still whispered the name Zerath like a wound that refused to close. Soldiers spat it as a curse, priests whispered it as a warning, and commanders avoided it entirely, fearing that even saying the name would summon the thing that had ended wars. Zerath had been no myth. Armies had been swallowed whole when it emerged from jungle, ash plains, or ruin, cutting through metal and bone with the same feral hunger. Fleets had been sent to bomb entire continents into glass, and yet, when the smoke cleared, the beast still walked. Empires could not kill it. They had stopped trying. Kale Vaynar had heard the story since his first year in the human military, back when he was still unscarred, still clinging to the naive belief that war had rules. 20 years and a dozen campaigns later, he knew better. He had fought under banners of peacekeeping, border defense, liberation, lies that ended the same way, men broken, bodies forgotten, and a galaxy that fed on conflict. He had walked away from his command not because he lost faith in humanity, but because he saw too much of himself reflected in the endless machine of violence. Now he was a scout, living on the fringes where governments lost their reach and where old stories still left marks on stone. The locals on Perith 7 had been wary of him from the moment he landed. They wore their distrust openly, their scaled faces and vertical pupils widening in alarm when he asked about the ruins in the southern forest. One merchant spat on the ground and told him to burn his maps. Another clutched their young tighter and hissed, "You seek the devourer's grave? Leave before the night swallows you." Kale only nodded, storing their fear in the quiet chambers of his mind. Fear was data. Fear meant something worth finding. He walked through jungle that seemed to hold its breath. The canopy shimmered with alien light, leaves black-green by day and silver at dusk, and every step broke a silence that felt too absolute. He saw wrecks half buried in roots, armored transports cracked open like eggs, weapons rusting in heaps. Once, he found a helmed skull still lodged in its suit, the bones clawed inward as if the soldier had died reaching for his own throat. Kale knelt, brushing away moss, reading faded human glyphs along the plating. The insignia was older than him. The soldier had come here believing he was part of an unstoppable army. He had been wrong. The crater lay beyond a ridge, its edges scorched black, the center nothing but churned mud and twisted wreckage. Kale sat there as the light faded, setting his pack down with practiced calm. He lit no fire. He made no sound except the scrape of his knife across a ration tin. He wanted to be noticed. That was the point. The wind shifted. Kale froze. It wasn't just the air moving, it was displacement like a vast body sliding through the trees with deliberate patience. Branches bent. Trunks creaked. A shadow detached itself from the forest and lingered at the rim of the crater. Two eyes caught the moonlight, not glowing but reflecting, cold and calculating. Kale's throat tightened, but he didn't reach for the rifle slung across his back. Instead, he placed it gently on the ground, his palms open. His heartbeat thundered, but his voice when it came was steady. "You're real," he said, as if confirming to himself more than addressing the thing. The shadow lowered, muscles rippling under hide that looked armored by nature itself. It moved like liquid death, a fusion of feline grace and reptilian power. Its maw, when it opened, showed teeth long enough to pierce bulkhead plating. Kale knew what it was. He had studied reports, shaky vid captures, desperate transmissions cut off by screams. No archive had done it justice. Zerath had come. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to fire, but Kale did what no soldier, no commander, no empire had ever dared. He reached to the ground, picked up a broken branch and tossed it lightly into the open. The stick clattered against stone, harmless, absurd. A gesture so small it bordered on suicidal mockery. The predator's head turned. Its gaze followed the arc of the stick. Silence stretched. Kale kept his breathing steady, though his chest ached from restraint. Leaves rustled. The massive shape moved, deliberate, unhurried. Zerath crossed the crater without breaking eye contact, every step louder than Kale's pulse. It sniffed at the branch, jaws flexing, then closed its teeth around the wood. With a sound that was almost insultingly casual, it padded back across the crater. Kale's muscles tensed for the killing blow. Instead, Zerath dropped the branch at his feet. Kale blinked. His mind rejected the image even as his eyes confirmed it. The devourer, the beast of 1,000 wars, had just fetched a stick. The jungle around them remained silent, as though even the trees refused to acknowledge what had just happened. Kale leaned forward slowly, every nerve sparking, and touched the branch. Zerath did not move. It only watched him, chest rising with breath that sounded like distant thunder. Kale whispered, "So that's how it is." The creature tilted its head, a motion that would have been comical if not for the weight of history pressed into its form. The soldier inside Kale calculated survival odds, exit vectors, possible distractions. But another part of him, the man who had abandoned armies, who was tired of being a cog in endless wars, saw something else. Maybe Zerath wasn't a monster. Maybe it had been waiting for something no empire ever offered it. Trust. Kale reached for another branch. He didn't throw it yet. He just held it loosely in his fingers, his voice low and steady. "If you want it, you'll have to come closer." The eyes glinted again. Zerath shifted, claws scraping stone. It had not killed him. Not yet. And for the first time in a long while, Kale felt not fear but anticipation. The night deepened. Somewhere in the distance, a carrion bird screamed. But here, in the crater where armies had died, a man and a monster regarded each other in silence, bound by something neither yet understood. Kale exhaled, steady, ready for whatever came next. The jungle did not sleep. It held its breath as Kale remained kneeling with the branch in his hand, the enormous shadow before him watching with a patience that unsettled every instinct in his body. He had seen predators before, creatures that struck fast and vanished, creatures that dominated territory, creatures that killed without reason. Zerath was none of those. Its stillness was deliberate, its attention sharpened not by hunger but by calculation. Kale realized, with a clarity that frightened him more than its teeth, that it understood this exchange. He let the stick roll from his hand and tossed it once more into the open. The branch spun awkwardly and landed short of the crater's edge. For a long moment Zerath didn't move, its massive head tilted slightly as if considering whether this game was insult or invitation. Then it strode forward, each step thudding softly against the earth. It picked up the branch with jaws that had cracked armored plating and carried it back, setting it down gently in front of him again. Kale's lips twitched into the faintest smile. "You're not what they think you are," he murmured. His voice was steady but his pulse refused to calm. Zerath shifted its weight, a low sound vibrating in its chest. Not a growl, not a threat, something else. A test. Hours passed like that. Kale threw, Zerath returned. Sometimes the beast paused, sniffing the air, studying Kale as though measuring his worth. At dawn, when mist coiled across the crater, Kale's hands shook from exhaustion. He had not dared to sleep, yet he felt more awake than ever. The impossible had happened twice, then 3 times, then again until the rhythm itself became undeniable. The devourer played fetch. The universe would not believe it. Kale hardly believed it himself. He reached for his pack, pulling out a sealed water canister. Zerath's eyes tracked the movement with piercing intensity. Kale uncapped it slowly and poured some into his palm, letting droplets fall onto the dirt. Then he slid the canister forward. Zerath lowered its colossal head and, with terrifying gentleness, lapped the water straight from Kale's open hand. The soldier in him screamed at the vulnerability of the act. The man in him, tired of death, tired of orders, felt something else stir. Respect perhaps. Recognition. A faint metallic whir cut through the morning air. Kale stiffened instantly. Zerath's head snapped up, ears twitching toward the treeline. From the cover of foliage, lights blinked and shapes moved, slender, insectal forms cloaked in shifting camouflage. Alien scouts. Kale cursed under his breath. He knew the type. Mercenaries contracted to watch forbidden zones, vultures feeding on scraps of war. They must have been tracking his signal since he landed. He could almost hear their disbelief as they watched the spectacle before them. A human kneeling beside the monster that had erased battalions. The first bolt of plasma struck the dirt near his boot, hissing with heat. Kale dove sideways, drawing his rifle, though he knew it was too late to hide. Zerath exploded into motion with a speed that made the earth quake. The beast's roar shattered the silence, a sound layered with fury and promise. The scouts scattered, their cloaks flickering uselessly as Zerath tore through the treeline. Kale rolled to his feet, weapon ready, but stopped cold. Zerath wasn't rampaging. It wasn't devouring indiscriminately. It struck with precision, claws swiping weapons from hands, tail lashing to disarm rather than kill outright. Screams of terror filled the jungle as the mercenaries fled in chaos, their discipline gone. One scout fell, cornered against a boulder. Zerath loomed above it, jaw opening wide enough to bite the alien in two. Down, Kale barked instinctively. His voice cracked the air like a command he had given 1,000 times before to squads of men. And the predator froze. The alien scrambled away in disbelief. Zerath closed its mouth, exhaling a hot gust that rattled Kale's gear. Then, impossibly, it turned back and padded toward him, towering yet calm. It stopped at his side, the ground trembling under its weight. Kale lowered his weapon slowly. He could feel the scouts retreating, could imagine them already transmitting frantic reports to their employers. The galaxy would hear of this. The beast no army could control had just obeyed a human's voice. Zerath sat, its bulk casting Kale in shadow. It lowered its head until its snout rested near his boot, a gesture that might have been submission or simple curiosity. Kale reached out, his hand hovering for a long second, then touched the armored hide. Heat pulsed beneath it, the strength of a living engine of war. Zerath did not flinch. Kale exhaled. "So you're choosing me," he whispered. The moment was shattering in its simplicity. Armies had died trying to kill this creature, empires had crumbled under its onslaught, and yet here it sat like a hound awaiting its master's will. Kale felt the weight of what that meant pressing down on him like a mountain. He hadn't sought a weapon. He hadn't sought power. But power had found him. In the distance, a guttural horn sounded, the mercenaries calling for reinforcements. Kale's mind raced. Word would spread faster than fire. Warlords, governments, councils, all of them would come, each convinced that whoever controlled Zerath controlled fear itself. He pictured fleets burning skies, planets trembling under orbital guns, all of it drawn to the fact that one man and one beast had made a connection in a crater. He looked at Zerath, who watched him with an unsettling stillness, and made a decision. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't try to leash the predator or chain it for humanity's wars. He would stand beside it whatever storm followed. Because in this galaxy of endless violence, perhaps the only thing more dangerous than the devourer itself was the possibility that it had finally chosen a companion. Kale crouched and picked up another branch. His muscles ached, his mind swirled with dread and wonder, yet his hand was steady as he tossed the stick across the clearing. Zerath's head followed the arc, its body rippling with coiled energy. Then it bounded forward, the earth shaking under its massive frame, and returned once again with the branch held delicately between teeth that could crush starship armor. Kale took it with a calmness he didn't feel. Somewhere above the canopy, hidden eyes and sensors would be watching. Somewhere across the stars, men and monsters alike would hear of this. The game of fetch was no game at all, it was a declaration, a bond written not in blood but in trust. Kale looked out toward the horizon where the horns still echoed. Trouble was already coming. And when it arrived, the galaxy would finally learn what it meant when the predator that devoured armies decided to guard a single human. The transmission spread like fire through dry grass, faster than any fleet could travel. Grainy footage captured from the mercenary scouts showed the impossible. The devourer of armies, the nightmare that had haunted dozens of civilizations, sitting calmly beside a human. The predator's colossal frame filled the image, its hide glistening like plated iron, its jaws capable of splitting tanks. Yet there it was, dropping a branch at Kale Vaynar's feet like a trained hound. The mercenaries had meant the recording as proof of Kale's imminent death. Instead, it became a revelation that fractured the galaxy. In the council halls of the core, alien delegates shouted over one another. A scaled minister slammed his claws against the table, declaring that humanity had proven itself too reckless to exist unchecked. A feathered envoy hissed back that perhaps the predator had always sought someone bold enough to meet it without fear, and humanity's audacity was exactly why it obeyed. Another, smaller delegate whispered that this was the end of balance. If one species could command the uncommandable, then wars would no longer be fought with armies but with symbols of terror. Kale heard none of it directly. He sat in the shadows of a cave with Zerath sprawled at the entrance, the beast's slow breathing echoing like thunder in the confined space. He had patched a cut on his arm, the sting reminding him that he was still only human, fragile and finite. The galaxy might argue over what he represented, but here in the dirt, all he saw was a creature resting after a night of watchfulness. Still he felt the weight pressing in. The scouts' retreat guaranteed pursuit, and soon it would not be scattered mercenaries but fleets descending. He tested Zerath daily, expanding the fragile bond with careful patience. A tossed rod was retrieved, supplies were hauled, commands were given and, sometimes, obeyed. What unsettled him most was the intelligence in its eyes. Zerath didn't simply follow instinct. It evaluated, weighed and then chose. Kale had not bent it to his will, he had only given it reason to listen. A week later the first fleet arrived. Not a conquering armada, but a heavily armed delegation of warships flying the sigil of the Veari Dominion. They broadcast their demands across all channels: surrender the Predator to them or be annihilated. Kale, watching from the ridge with Zerath at his side, felt the old reflexes of command rise in his chest. He could almost hear the voices of his former officers telling him to hold ground, to deploy countermeasures, to prepare for war. But he had none of that. He had only a beast and his own will. The ships lowered their drones, silver forms descending in formation like falling stars. Zerath growled low, a vibration that shook Kale's bones. "Not yet," Kale murmured, his hand resting against the creature's hide. He stepped forward, exposed, the drone's weapons targeting him instantly. The Dominion commander appeared on the main feed, a stern figure with horns like jagged blades. His voice was heavy with contempt. "Human, you claim what belongs to all. That thing has destroyed my people for centuries. You will hand it over or we will wipe this rock clean." Kale met his gaze through the screen, his voice level. "You tried to kill it for centuries and failed. You see a weapon. I see something else. And it doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to anyone." The commander barked a laugh and ordered the drones forward. The air trembled as they advanced, energy weapons glowing. Kale held up a hand to Zerath, forcing calm into his own voice. "Wait." The beast crouched, every muscle coiled, but it obeyed. When the first drone fired, Kale dropped flat against the ground. Zerath leapt past him in a blur of muscle and fury. It didn't rampage blindly, it struck with surgical precision, claws slicing through weapon joints, tail smashing power cores. Drones fell smoking to the earth in seconds, not a single blast allowed near Kale. The feed from the Dominion flagship streamed live across the galaxy, every world tuned in to witness. They expected slaughter, indiscriminate rage. What they saw instead was obedience. The Predator fought not as an uncontrollable storm but as a guardian, striking only when Kale's life was threatened, pausing when he commanded. On the council floor, silence fell. Then panic. Some saw it as proof that the Predator had become humanity's servant. Others argued it showed a partnership, dangerous precisely because it was voluntary. A minority dared to hope. It meant the monster was capable of choice, and if so, perhaps it was not a monster at all. For Kale, the battle ended in silence. Zerath padded back to him, streaked with ash and dust, and lowered its head as if awaiting approval. Kale's hand lingered against its massive jaw. "Good," he said softly. That was enough. The Dominion fleet, humiliated, pulled back. But Kale knew this was no victory. This was the beginning of something larger. His image was already spreading. The lone soldier and the beast that fetched sticks and defended him like kin. To some, he was proof of humanity's danger. To others, a figure of awe. And to men like Commander Zerath, a sworn enemy who must be erased to restore pride. That night, as the jungle hummed with hidden life, Kale sat against Zerath's flank, the warmth of the beast grounding him against the storm gathering in the stars. He thought of the council's debates he could not hear, of the fleets already being readied, of the galaxy twisting itself in fear of a bond forged from nothing more than trust. He had not chosen this role, yet it was his now. Zerath stirred, nudging him lightly with a snout that could crush steel. Kale chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, I know. They're coming." He picked up a stick from the ground and tossed it lazily into the clearing. Zerath bounded after it, the earth shaking underfoot, and returned as before, laying the branch carefully at Kale's feet. The universe watched, unable to look away. And in that simple act, armies trembled, councils plotted, and Kale realized the truth. The Predator that had once devoured nations had not been tamed. It had chosen. The galaxy had never been united in peace, but fear had always bound its empires in silence. Zerath was that silence. For centuries, the beast had been the unspeakable reason wars halted, the shadow cast over every battlefield. Now that fear was fractured. Some saw Kale and the Predator as proof of human arrogance, others as a beacon of hope, but to Commander Zerath of the Dominion, it was humiliation sharpened into obsession. Zerath had risen to power, vowing vengeance against the devourer. His ancestors had died in its jaws, their cities reduced to rubble while fleets fled in disgrace. To him, it was not a legend but a wound carved into the marrow of his people. The news feeds of Kale throwing sticks and laughing as Zerath returned them were not an oddity to Zerath, they were sacrilege. A beast that had broken armies was now performing tricks for a human soldier. It was mockery and he would not suffer it. Kale knew little of Zerath personally, but he understood the inevitability of someone like him. Every war bred commander's too proud to accept humiliation. He felt it in his bones as he watched the skies over Perith 7 darken with the arrival of fleets larger than any Dominion deployment he had ever seen. This was no diplomatic threat, no testing probe. It was war. Zerath sensed it too. The beast prowled the ridge restlessly, muscles rippling under its plated hide, eyes fixed on the horizon where glimmers of descending ships grew brighter. Its breathing deepened, low and thunderous, the sound of a storm preparing to break. Kale laid a hand on its flank, grounding himself in the heat of its presence. "Not yet," he whispered, though his own chest felt tight with anticipation. The first wave came not with infantry but with bombardment. Orbital fire streaked down, searing the forest in lines of white-hot destruction. Trees toppled, earth split, and the sky itself seemed to burn. Kale threw himself flat as shockwaves roared past, but Zerath stood unmoving, the fire cascading around it. Where ash fell, its hide glowed faintly before cooling. The beast let out a roar that shook the crater and rolled across the jungle like thunder tearing the heavens. Dropships followed, vomiting soldiers in gleaming armor across the battlefield. They advanced with practiced formation, their heavy weapons trained on the ridge. Kale raised his rifle and fired, dropping one then another, but his shots were irrelevant against the tide. He knew the truth, alone he could not stop them. Alone he was nothing. But he was not alone. Zerath launched forward, a blur of black and silver, slamming into the advancing lines with catastrophic force. Claws tore through armor, tail smashed vehicles aside, teeth sank into turrets and ripped them away. Yet Kale saw something in its movements that chilled him. Discipline. Zerath wasn't raging blindly. It was striking like a soldier, fast, efficient, devastating. Each kill was precise, each motion purposeful, as though echoing Kale's own instincts. Kale found himself shouting commands without thinking. "Left flank. Behind you." Zerath responded as though the words were more than sounds, pivoting, intercepting, adapting. Where Kale pointed, the predator struck. Soldiers who had once mocked the beast as a feral monster now fled in terror as it dismantled entire formations with a tactical focus that could not be explained. But Zerath had not come unprepared. His flagship descended into the atmosphere, a black leviathan bristling with guns. Its cannons unleashed torrents of fire into the jungle, gouging the earth where Zerath leapt. The ground split and burned, throwing Kale to his knees. He dragged himself upright, lungs burning, eyes fixed on the behemoth tearing the sky. A voice boomed across the battlefield, broadcast from the flagship. Zerath himself. "Look at what you've made it. A servant to your pathetic species, reduced to fetching sticks and obeying commands. I will burn this planet, human, and scatter your bones with its ashes. Today the devourer returns to legend." Kale spat blood into the dirt, then raised his voice, ragged but clear. "You don't understand, Zerath. It's not obeying me. It's choosing." The flagship's cannon swiveled, targeting Kale's ridge. He knew he had seconds. He turned to Zerath, who stood crouched, muscles trembling with restrained fury. "Stay with me," Kale whispered. Then the cannons fired. The sky became light. Kale braced, certain of death, but Zerath moved faster than thought. The predator threw itself over him, shielding him with its colossal body. The ground convulsed as energy fire slammed into them, burning flesh, scorching armor-thick hide. Zerath roared in agony but held, taking the brunt of destruction until the cannon's thunder faded. Kale pushed himself free, his hands slick with the beast's blood. Zerath still stood, trembling but unbowed, eyes blazing with a fury that no empire could contain. Kale's chest clenched at the sight, torn between awe and grief. He had asked it not to be a weapon, and yet it suffered like one for him. The soldiers below had faltered. They had seen the flagship's full fury fail to kill the monster. They had seen it shield a human with its own body. The spectacle broke them. Weapons fell from shaking hands. Some dropped to their knees. Others fled outright. The terror of the devourer had returned, but twisted, reshaped, no longer as an unstoppable curse but as something worse: loyalty. Zerath's voice snarled across the battlefield, more desperate than commanding. "Cowards! It is still a beast. It cannot choose. It cannot love. Destroy them both." But no one moved. Kale staggered forward, standing before the predator that towered above him. He raised his voice so all could hear, his words carried on the feed streaming across the galaxy. "You've all feared Zerath because you thought it was unstoppable. You tried to kill it, to cage it, to worship it. None of you ever tried to understand it. But it made a choice. Not to obey. Not to be chained. To stand." He glanced back at the beast, then up at the burning sky. "And I'll stand with it." Zerath lifted its head, a low rumble building in its chest, and then it did something that shattered the last remnants of disbelief. In the midst of a battlefield with armies watching, the predator turned and dropped a charred branch at Kale's feet. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then the image spread across every feed, carried to every council and every world. The devourer of armies had not only fought at a human's side, it had played fetch in the middle of war. Zerath's forces broke entirely. His flagship shuddered as crew abandoned posts. His voice faded from the comms, consumed by chaos. Kale stooped, picked up the branch and let it fall again. Zerath's massive jaws closed around it, and the predator returned once more to his side. Kale's body ached, his ears rang with the echoes of battle, but he could feel the truth burning into history. Empires would never be the same. Wars would never be the same. And yet he also knew it was not over. Zerath had not fallen. The councils would not relent. The galaxy had only just begun to grasp what it meant that the predator who devoured armies now fetched sticks for a human. The Dominion's retreat left the jungle smoldering, its canopy stripped away, the ground torn open by fire and impact. Kale stood amidst ruin, his rifle slack in his hands, and watched Zerath lower its massive head to drink from a stream turned muddy with ash. The beast's sides heaved with each breath, blood drying in thick patterns across its hide, but its eyes remained sharp and unyielding. To Kale, that gaze was a mirror of his own resolve, battered, scorched, but unbroken. For the first time since the war began, silence held. The comm feeds were no longer filled with orders or panic, but with billions of voices whispering, sharing, spreading what they had seen. Entire empires trembled on the brink of admitting what none dared say aloud, that a predator who once devoured armies now stood with a single human, not because of control but because of choice. But silence never lasted long in the galaxy. Zerath's humiliation festered into fury. His flagship had limped away with its guns still intact, and vengeance was a wound he would not allow to scab. Kale knew he would return, not as a commander with soldiers, but as a man desperate to reclaim a legacy of terror that had slipped through his fingers. That knowledge gnawed at Kale even as he pressed a hand to Zerath's flank, whispering gratitude the beast could not answer in words but always seemed to understand. The day came sooner than expected. The horizon split once more with fire as the flagship re-emerged, descending alone this time, its fleet fractured by fear and desertion. Kale narrowed his eyes. This was no strategic assault. It was personal. Zerath would not allow legends to end this way. The ship landed in the ruins of the battlefield, its hull scorched but defiant. From its maw emerged Zerath himself, armored in black plating etched with scars of past wars, a colossal warblade clutched in his gauntlet fists. He marched toward Kale with the arrogance of a man who still believed fear could bind reality to his will. Soldiers and feeds watched from a distance, but none dared interfere. This was not a battle between armies, it was a duel of truths. "You've disgraced the galaxy," Zerath roared, his voice amplified, carrying across the field. "You turned the devourer into a pet. Do you think that makes you strong? It makes you pathetic. You'll die here, human, and when you do, the beast will remember what it is." Kale met his gaze, steady, calm. "What it is has already changed. Not because of me but because it chose to be more than what you feared." He adjusted his grip on his rifle, though he knew it would do little against Zerath's armor. This would not be won by weapons alone. Zerath charged, blade raised, his steps shaking the broken earth. Kale dodged, the warblade cleaving into the ground where he had stood a breath earlier. He fired a burst into the cracks of Zerath's armor, but the commander only snarled and swung again, sparks flying where steel met stone. Kale rolled, each movement fueled by desperation and clarity. He could not match strength with strength, but he could endure, and endurance was humanity's oldest weapon. Zerath prowled at the edge of the duel, muscles tensed, every instinct demanding it to intervene. Yet it held back, watching Kale, awaiting a signal. Kale felt its eyes burning into him, and in that gaze lay trust. The same trust Kale had given when he whispered not to fight blindly, not to become only a weapon. Their bond was tested in silence, in restraint, in choice. Zerath lunged again, catching Kale across the shoulder, the blade's edge tearing through armor and flesh. Pain exploded, but Kale gritted his teeth and stayed on his feet, staggering backward. He raised his voice not just for Zerath but for the galaxy listening. "You think control is power. You think fear is loyalty. But fear breaks, Zerath. Fear runs. What stays, what fights beside you even when it bleeds, that is strength." Zerath's eyes flared with madness. "It's a beast, nothing more." He raised his blade for the killing strike. Kale, chest heaving, gave Zerath the barest nod. The predator surged forward with a roar that split the air, striking Zerath with unstoppable force. Claws raked across armor, teeth snapped down on the warblade, shattering it like brittle glass. Zerath screamed, defiance twisting into terror as Zerath pinned him beneath a weight no army had ever withstood. For a moment the battlefield held its breath. The devourer stood over its old enemy, jaws poised at his throat. One bite would end the Dominion commander and cement the legend of the beast forever. Billions watching expected it. Some demanded it. Even Zerath, trembling, seemed to wait for the inevitable. But Zerath did not strike. Instead it growled low, then stepped back, leaving Zerath alive but stripped of every shred of power he had clung to. The predator turned and padded to Kale's side, lowering its massive head until it brushed his uninjured hand. The message was undeniable. Choice. Mercy. Bond. The predator had once devoured armies, but now it refused to be ruled by hatred or hunger. It refused to be Zerath's mirror. Kale looked down at the broken commander, then up at the countless feeds capturing every breath of this moment. His voice was raw but unshaken. You wanted the galaxy to see a beast. Let them see what you could never understand. Loyalty. Trust. Something stronger than fear. Zerath's soldiers did not come for him. His own crew turned away ashamed. The commander lay on the battlefield, defeated not by death but by irrelevance, as the predator and the human walked away together. Kale leaned into Zerath's massive form, exhaustion weighing on every step, but a fierce pride burning in his chest. He had not tamed the devourer. He had stood beside it. And in return it had chosen him. The feeds spread faster than fire, and in every corner of the galaxy, empires whispered a new legend. Not of destruction, not of terror, but of a bond that rewrote what strength meant. Children of distant worlds laughed as they replayed the moment the predator fetched a stick in the middle of war. Commanders studied the footage of a human and a beast fighting as one. And rulers, once certain of their dominion, stared into the shadows and wondered if loyalty could ever be conquered. As the jungle healed, Kale sat by a fire, his arm bandaged, watching Zerath sleep. The beast's chest rose and fell in slow, steady rhythm, its scars glowing faintly in the firelight. Kale reached out and rested a hand on its side, whispering words the galaxy might never hear. We changed them. Maybe we can change more. Above them, the stars burned bright, and for the first time in centuries, they seemed to hold not fear but possibility. The predator who devoured armies now fetched sticks for a human, and in that simple truth lay a power no empire could ever break.